Brampton is just a very strange place. Every week, something happens in Brampton that goes extremely viral on social media, and you just have to ask why exactly that is. A lot of us know why that is. For many Canadians, Brampton looks and feels like a totally foreign place. But right now, some very strange things are happening in Brampton that warrant mention and further investigation. Well, one of the things happening in Brampton right now, which many of you who watch the show regularly will know about, is that for months, almost every weekend, large groups of international students with expiring work permits have been protesting in the streets, not only demanding work permit extensions, but also calling for an end to online hate and racism targeting Indians. They also keep bringing up the Komagata Maru incident, which happened in 1914. Now, what does that have to do with anything going on right now? Well, we will get into that later on in the show. Also, for whatever reason, many young people in Brampton seem to have a penchant for open-air street brawls. But these clips of open-air street brawls in Brampton have become such an issue that even the mayor, Patrick Brown, had to get involved and had to issue a statement on social media over the weekend about it. Lastly, all those slumlords in Brampton, you know, the ones who rent out basement units to 7 tenants at a time, well, they're very upset that Brampton is now trying to institute a licensing program for landlords, that they are now protesting in the street, demanding a right to remain as a slumlord. They don't want to have any rules placed on them, and they don't want to have any oversight from the city placed on what they're doing. Well, we know what they're doing, and it's quite ridiculous. You know, in Canada, we don't really do the whole slumlords thing, but to these guys, I guess they think otherwise. All of this is happening at once in Brampton, just adding to the intrigue that so many Canadians have over this very strange city in Canada. We're going to get into all of that on the show, but before we do, be sure to drop a like on this video, help us out by subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this: do you think these protests in Brampton will escalate into something worse in the future? Let me know your answer in the comments below, and let's get into it. Well, we start with the protesting international students demanding work permit extensions in Brampton. They've been protesting almost every weekend since we covered those first few protests in Brampton over a month ago now. First it was out in PEI, then it came to Brampton. You saw what happened when we were there a few months ago. They refused to speak to us. They said that we could cover their protest, but they weren't going to talk to True North journalists because we were racist against them. We were spreading racism, online hate. You see, these protesters in Brampton, they've picked up a new slogan that they keep using: no more Komagata Maru. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Komagata Maru incident was, the ship carrying hundreds of Sikhs in 1914 planning to immigrate to Canada was named the SS Komagata Maru. Now, the story we've been fed about the truth behind the Komagata Maru incident is not really the case. Politicians and Sikh activists in Canada have tried to tell us that really the Komagata Maru incident was one of the darkest chapters in Canadian history, when the Canadian government turned around a group of Sikhs who wanted to immigrate into Canada because we had racist policies targeting Indians. The Komagata Maru project was actually an immigration challenge designed to undermine Canadian immigration laws. The passengers on the Komagata Maru boat were actually being fed anti-British and extremist literature, being taught Marxist lessons on the ship before they got to Canada. It's funny, that part of the story never actually seems to make it into the common dialogue. Perhaps a further investigation into what the Komagata Maru story really was is warranted on this show, but for now, we'll just leave it at that. Ultimately, these protesters in Brampton, they want to try to use that story to say that they are the victims here. They are the ones being victimized by a racist Canadian government that wants to ship them back to India. These protesters in Brampton, they came here as temporary residents. They came here as international students and told a Canadian Border Services agent that when their visa was up, they would go home. There was no promise of being a permanent resident. There was no promise that they would even find work here, because they were all supposed to go back when their studies were finished. Now, these people in Brampton, the same group that is protesting in PEI, they want to demand a right to stay in our country. Well, they have no right to make any demands. They never did have any right to make any demands. But their rhetoric is rising, their frustration towards Canadians is rising, and now they're taking the extreme step, believe it or not, of threatening the Canadian government and blaming the Canadian government for things that are happening to the protesters in PEI. Last week, there was a fire that broke out among the tents from these international students protesting and making an encampment outside the PEI legislature. But the protesters in Brampton decided that yesterday they would go on Instagram and release a statement, not only blaming the federal government and racists for the fire in PEI, but also threatening the federal government with retaliation if anything like this happens again. Take a listen to this.
Someone tried to put the tent into the fire as the protester was sleeping in the tent. So we deeply condemned this thing, as we got to know that it was done by some racist bodies or must be done by the government. They were trying to intimidate the protesters, but we are coming strong from Ontario as well and supporting all the PA protesters.
We have a message for the racist groups and the Canadian government who think that by this incident they could stop the fight. We are deeply condemning it also, and if they are thinking that they could stop this fight like this, they are completely delusional right now. So our struggle will be continued, and even in Toronto, we will have the protests and everything in their support.
So in the future, if anything like this happens again, and if there is any damage to any PWP holder, then the federal government is going to be accountable for that.
Now, while all of that was happening, yet another open street brawl occurred in the beautiful and safe city of Brampton. Take a look at this.
How can you stop? How can you stop?
Now, this brawl appears to have occurred at one of the many Brampton takeover car rallies that happens almost every weekend. According to the Brampton Guardian, illegal takeover car rallies and street races become a huge problem in Brampton, police say. Are these guys better at driving than they are at fighting? Because clips of that brawl are pretty pathetic, slapping each other around. No one was even able to get in a good punch, a good hook. Embarrassing, if you ask me. If you're actually going to get into a brawl, at least know what you're doing. Well, the answer to the question is, of course, no. We know that because Brampton is one of the most dangerous places to drive a car in Canada. Take a listen to the statistics published by the Brampton Guardian in this article. According to Peel Police, officers issued over 20,000 Highway Traffic Act charges, including more than 4,200 speeding tickets, 400 careless driving charges, 1,300 charges relating to mufflers causing unnecessary noise, and more than 900 charges for stunt driving and racing during the first 6 months of 2024. Remarkable. These street brawls happen all the time in Brampton. Before they all get speed tickets and caught by the police, they end up going for a little street brawl. Now, this happened last year, September 2023, and it looks like some of these people in this street brawl brought swords to the fight. And this is a famous brawl that occurred a few years ago when the Hindus and the Sikhs began fighting each other in a mall. Just your typical fireworks war and street brawl. You see it in every Canadian city, big and small, up and down the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Yeah, who's kidding you? That doesn't happen anywhere else, it seems, other than in Brampton. Why is that? This old clip resurfaced in the wake of that previous open street brawl clip, kind of hammering home the point that Brampton is a very weird place and it's not a very nice place. To the point in which Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown had to go onto social media and say there was a lot of misinformation online. This is yet another example of it. This wasn't in Brampton, and it wasn't even an incident from this year. And lastly, you've all seen the videos, you've all seen the clips of the awful living situation faced by so many in Brampton. So many international students who travel from India to Canada end up living 7 to a basement or 8 to a house. Clear violations of fire code and safety codes. You've seen the listings and you've seen the videos on social media that look like this. We're dealing with modern day slumlords. In order to try to do something about this, Brampton has instituted a residential rental licensing program. But at the beginning of August, they've only been able to license 1,700 units. The effort, of course, is to maintain community safety, to maintain tenant safety. But the landlords have been protesting this in the streets. The slumlords, I should call them. They've been protesting this in the streets. They don't want to have any oversight over what they're doing. To encourage more landlords to apply for the residential rental licensing program, the city removed the following requirements to simplify the application process. Property owners are no longer required to submit proof of ownership. A landlord is no longer required to provide a criminal record check. They aren't required to provide floor plans. They aren't required to provide electrical inspections. They aren't required to provide gas inspections or parking and storage plans. But yet that is still not enough, and these slumlords are still out in the streets protesting. I mean, come on, what exactly is going on here? This all seems very strange. Maybe we should actually go back to Brampton to investigate this in more depth. You let me know in the comments as well if you think we should go back. Anyways, that's going to do it for us today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratio.